Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CPA Australia's webinar, Mental Health at Work. My name is Katrina Benjamin, and I will be hosting this webinar and available for any troubleshooting questions you might have with your WebEx setup via chat. We have people joining us from all over the country for today's webinar, and I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from around Australia and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. I would now like to introduce you to today's chairperson, who will facilitate today's session, Brent Salve. Brent is Managing Director at CEVA, a fellow CPA member, and is Deputy President of the Victorian Divisional Council. I will open your mic and video. Hello, Brent.
Hello, Katrina. Hello, everyone.
Excellent, Brent. We can hear you. So over to you.
Thank you, Katrina. And welcome, everyone, to this session, which I'm excited about. As said, my name is Brent Salve, and I'm the Managing Director of an advisory firm in Melbourne called CEVA. And it's my pleasure today to invite Michael O'Hanlon and Dr. Kathy Bond as our guest speakers. I'll just give a brief introduction to them both. Michael O'Hanlon is a workplace engagement manager and has over 20 years experience in various operational and management roles in the mining and information technology industry. For the past 14 years, Michael has worked at Beyond Blue, an independent non-for-profit organisation working to ensure that all Australians achieve their best mental health. His current role combines his professional roles and personal experience of depression, anxiety, to advocate to corporations, industry associations and peak bodies about the benefits of improving mental health within their workplaces. So looking forward to hear from Michael in a moment. And I'll also introduce our second speaker, which is Dr. Kathy Bond. So Dr. Kathy Bond is the Workplace Engagement Manager at Mental Health First Aid Australia and has worked for MHFA for over 7 years. One of her first projects with MHFA was to develop resources for financial services professionals when working with clients with mental health problems and financial difficulties. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of these great organisations and great presenters. Just a couple of little things before we get started. Firstly, we will be facilitating discussion. It's really important that we can ask questions to the presenters. We have these professional experts here with us to answer as many questions as they can. So we've purposely made enough time at the end of the session to answer as many questions as they can. Your Q&A chat box, which should be found on the right-hand side of your screen, I'll be monitoring that throughout the whole discussion, and I'll be trying to pull out the questions so we can ask both Michael and Kathy after their presentation. So please, I encourage you, if you have a question, please ask it, because it's likely that others will have the same question. So it'd be really much appreciated and would form a great discussion. Before I open up what we're going to begin with a poll, I just want to give you a bit of context as to my, I suppose, involvement with this discussion. So I come to you as a member of CPA, which was just pointed out. I'm also an accountant and an advisor, like many of us out there. I'm an employer of staff. I have about 20 people, and I also have I'm also a person that can go through my own personal struggles. So I think acknowledging our role in this environment in the advising accounting industry is a particularly interesting time. And as you can see, we all wear many hats, and therefore any guidance or anything we can learn from Kathy and Michael today, I think, is going to go a long way for helping us be able to, get through these challenging times, not just from a workplace perspective, but from a personal perspective. I just wanted to start by giving a little bit of a story, just to maybe set some context. So I started CEVA about 8 years ago, and a couple of years prior to that, I had a client who just come on board as a referral, as a friend of a friend, and we really did hit it off. He was very successful in business. He started and managed and then sold many successful businesses, and I really enjoyed working with him because I could see how his passion towards being in business was high, and he was very good at what he did. So I was naturally attracted to those conversations, and we got to a point where we were somewhat inseparable in a way, speaking on the phone 2 or 3 times a day, talking about the next business idea and what was going on in the business world. He also helped us move into our office space now. We operate out of a warehouse type of apartment loft, and it's something which I wouldn't have had the courage to do, I don't think, if I didn't have his assistance. And he handmade many of our furniture to get us started, which was just amazing. So I really do value that time. And sadly, we lost my friend and client to suicide in 2014, which for me at the time was just so shocking. I really didn't quite understand what had happened, and it hit me very hard, I must say. And I suppose my first feeling was to become quite angry about this, and I felt really guilty that I didn't know more than what maybe I should have. I wasn't aware that he was suffering, and I didn't have any idea that he was in any pain. It wasn't until the funeral when I spoke to one of his best friends, and he explained to me that the pain that he's been feeling for such a long time is something somewhat to do with the pain that we all experience right now in a grievance of losing him. And that just sent a shockwave through my whole system because I was not aware. And from that moment on, it really woke me up. And it woke me up to really understand about how much there is some suffering out there, and mental health is a real thing. And since then, I've been on this journey of just trying to learn as much as I can and upskill as much as I can in order to firstly know myself, what to do. If I do come across some mental health concerns within either of my roles, but also just to acknowledge that it is very tough out there and people are genuinely suffering. So it really did wake me up from that point in time. I suppose my experience as an employer, it's something which I've, especially since that date, embraced as a strategy for our workplace to try to have a healthy workplace, whatever that means. We've signed up to employee assistance programs where our team can, phone up and get some help from a psychologist anonymously, and we encourage a really positive environment where people can talk openly about their feelings. But I suppose I still wanted to learn more, and I still think there's so much more to learn. So I'm really excited about today's session. I had a manager back then who was working with me, and he was just an amazing worker. And his work ethic was just quite phenomenal, and he would just take on more and more and more. I remember feeling at a point where his behaviour and mood started to change a little bit, and I was inquiring about how was he going, how was he feeling, and I wasn't getting much response. Everything was all good. What I didn't realise underneath was that he was burning out, and to a point where he did burn out. And sadly, I lost that team member to another industry. He went on a holiday, and he actually didn't return to our business or the industry because he was burnt out. And I still feel now, I wish I had better skills at that point in time to be able to help that situation and help him maybe get through that burnout, because I think it's something we've all got to be aware of. As an advisor, I'm fully aware that we're dealing with a really stressful time, and with our clients right now, we take on that burden of how they're feeling. And that, to me, can sometimes play its toll. And I'm really concerned for not only just myself and my colleagues and yourself as advisors, but our team out there who are working through clients who are going through really stressful situations. So I'd really love to be able to encourage all of us to have better conversations with our clients and identify where we might be able to help them out a little bit more. So again, I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. And then finally, me as a person, I'm very grateful. I haven't yet suffered from depression or anxiety myself, and I'm very grateful for that. But I'm very aware that's not susceptible. That can hit anybody at any time, given circumstances can change. So look, I'm my own wife suffered with some mental health issues after we had our children, and that was difficult. And for me, I'm proactively trying to improve myself all the time. I see a psychologist regularly from a proactive perspective, trying to help me understand myself better. And I'd really love to remove a stigma involved with seeking professional help, because I think it's such a liberating experience, especially when it's coming from a place where at the moment I don't need that assistance, but I can stay on top of myself, so then potentially I can help others more. So there's some angles of which I come to today. So from that advisor perspective, from an employee's perspective, even myself, I'm especially looking forward to the session today with Michael and Kathy. Brace yourselves for a great session. Please write down as many questions as you can, because I'd really love to hear from you, and so would Michael and Kathy. And I'd love to hand over now to Michael to begin his presentation.
Brent, it's Katrina. Did you want to run a couple of polls?
Aha, you got me there, Katrina. Thank you very much. We will start with a couple of polls. Sorry about that, Michael. So please, to set up today's discussion, I think it's important for us to stop and reflect a little bit about, what's going on in our workplace. And we just want to set the scene a little bit. So if we can please, on your panel, got these polling questions just about to come up. And I'd just like you to openly and honestly answer this the best you can, remembering that these polling questions are anonymous. So if you can answer the questions, firstly, have you got a mental health and wellbeing strategy in your workplace? Okay, A, B, C, D. So A being yes, and E, it's not on the radar at all. Please just openly answer the best you can. And then the second follow-up question is, how important is it to you to develop a mental health strategy in the next 6 months? Okay, so how important is it for you to develop a mental health strategy in the next 6 months? Well, let's leave it another little moment. So there's about 10, 15 seconds remaining. We can close those polls in a moment, Katrina, and we will wait for the results. So what I'll be able to do is I'll talk you back to the response, and I think that'll give us some great context for Kathy and Michael to start to get an idea of how we are strategically using our. Let's open that up.
Poll results 1 are now showing, and poll 2 is now active. Submit your responses.
Okay. So the polling 2, the second poll question can now be answered. How important is you to develop a mental health strategy in the next 6 months? Okay, how important is it to you to develop a mental health strategy in the next 6 months? Okay, we'll close that polling off, if that's okay. Now, I'm waiting for the results to come through for poll 1. And we can have a bit of a chat about that. Okay. So the second question, how important is it for you? I can't see the first poll question there, Katrina, but I can definitely see the second ones. How important is it for you? Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. So the question number 1, we have about 15 out of our questions, or about 11% of people have got a strategy. So only a small percentage really have a strategy in their workplace right now. 4% are saying that it's in my head, so we're sort of acknowledging that we've got something there, but it hasn't really been documented yet. 20% of us not really aware of the issue, but want to find out more about something like that today. 2% are saying I don't really know what mental health strategy is, and 5% it's not on the radar at all. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a really small proportion who's got a strategy about it, only 10%, so congratulations to you guys. I think the rest of us are really looking to find out more about how we can use this session today to start to think about a mental health strategy in the workplace, so thank you. And the second poll question, just if it's not on our radar, how important is it for us to get a strategy in the next 6 months? I'd just like to see those poll questions, please. I can't see those results there. Katrina? Okay. All right. So we have around about 28% are saying it's very important that they operate a mental health strategy in the next 6 months. So about a third of us and about half of us have not answered. So a third of us are really seeing it's something we want to put on the radar. And I think, again, today is something we can learn from. 16% are saying somewhat important. Okay. So hopefully after today's session, we have a much more clear understanding of what our mental health strategy could look like and what the benefits of that are too. And then we can start to put a bit of a plan in place thereafter. So thank you. If we close those polls. And thank you for the poll. I'd now like to throw it over to Michael, who will start his presentation. Thank you very much. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Brent. Thank you for that introduction. I think it's a really great intro, segue into what we're talking about today, both from a client perspective and an individual member perspective. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to CPA Australia for the opportunity to be able to speak with you today. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on today. For me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So what I'd like to do in the next about 30 minutes is give you a presentation around mental health and small business owners, meaning both members and your clients, and how mental health can be very much a key to survival of your business. I will go through the slides. I won't touch on every detail in them because, as Katrina mentioned earlier, you will receive a copy of the slide and you will receive a copy of the resource that I mentioned, that I will mention during my presentation. So I'd like to start with a few introductory areas just to get everybody on the same page. So we're talking about mental health, and I'd like to just set a clear perspective of what that is in terms of our common understanding. To do that, I'd just like to refer to a definition from the World Health Organization, which you can see there. It's a state of well-being in which we realize our own abilities, cope with the normal stresses of life, work productively and fruitfully, and make a contribution to our community. Now, the key aspect in this definition that I'd like you to take away is it is a state of well-being. It's a positive term, just like physical health is a positive term. What's missing from this definition is any sense of mental health conditions. So we're talking about something that's very positive to the individual and very positive to an organisation, as you'll see shortly. In parallel with this definition, I'd just like to show you this slide, which is a representation that mental health is not a static state for anybody. We all move up and down this arrow from green, where we're well, thriving, productive people, to the amber state in the middle, where we may be under a degree of psychological distress, or psychological stress rather. And if we know how to look after ourselves, we know our own signs and symptoms, we know what to do to move back into the green space. Or if we're working for a business that supports our colleagues, supports staff members, and has what I'll describe as a mentally healthy culture, the support is there to help you move back to the green. For those of us who don't have either of those, some people will always slip down to the red end of the spectrum, where you have a diagnosed mental health condition. But my key message with this slide is that everybody in Australia will move up and down this spectrum depending what is happening, either in our personal lives or at work. So that's how normal these changes in our mental health are. So what I'm talking about today doesn't just apply to the people who may be at the red end of the spectrum. I'll be talking to how we address everybody in our workplace and our clients in terms of where they may be on that spectrum as well. So you might ask, and I think the polls kind of hinted at this to some extent. So what's this got to do with my business and being a CPA member? Well, to start with, let me show you a couple of statistics. One is the Australian population. At any one time in Australia, there are 3 million people experiencing depression and or anxiety. And you can see on the right there, every day in Australia, 8 people take their own lives, 6 of which are men. And to put that number in some context, that's twice the national road toll. So this is the population from which we are drawing our staff. This is the population from which our clients are part of. So automatically, we will in some way or other either personally experience some psychological distress and move down the spectrum, or we will certainly professionally or personally know people who are impacted by poor mental health. If we apply that to a workplace context, research has clearly shown that on average, 1 in 5 employees is likely to be experiencing poor mental health. Now, you can do that number based on the size of your particular business, but that is the impact on the workplace population. But I remember I said earlier that a mental health is a positive construct. We've just been focusing on the red end of the spectrum. There's a body of research that highlights that 71% of people seeking work identified those characteristics of a mentally healthy workplace as being a priority when looking for a job. In other words, those workplaces are employers of choice. They have less staff turnover. Therefore, they need to do less training. There's a very positive return to the business there. And there's an increasing body of evidence that shows that there is a return on investment for every dollar invested in effective mental health initiatives on average of $4.20. Now, that's an average number, and the number gets significantly higher the more interventions you do at the green end of the spectrum. So the impact on your business is both on staff who may be affected, but also a direct bottom line impact in terms of having those attributes in your business. Of course, there are the legal obligations, and I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail this morning. Work health safety regulations talk about eliminating risks to health and safety as far as is reasonably practical. And in most states, that legislation makes no distinction between physical and mental health. It just talks about health. So workplaces are obliged to eliminate and minimize the risks to the mental health of their staff. Good question, Peter. I'll come back to that a bit later. If you want to know what effective interventions are, I'll just see a question pop up there. It'll come up in the next sections of my slides, a good segue. Under the Disability and Discrimination Act, there is an obligation for employees to provide reasonably practical adjustments, for their employees. And a reasonably practical adjustment is simply you may do things like if my depression or anxiety is really bad in the morning and we can agree on a late start, that's a reasonably practical adjustment. Or you may allow me more flexibility in seeing my mental health professional. Just think in terms of if I had a broken leg, what reasonably practical adjustment would you make in my work? If I was experiencing high blood pressure or cancer, what reasonably practical adjustments would you make in my work? Same as for a mental health condition, but I need to be able to fill the inherent requirements of the role. Privacy, it simply touches on if I was to disclose to you as my colleague or my manager, supervisor, that I was experiencing a mental health condition, you cannot disclose that to anybody else without my express permission, and only in a way that I describe or allow you to do so. And that's common for anybody's health conditions. It's not just mental health. Two exceptions. One, if I'm a risk to my own safety or a risk to the safety of my team, then clearly duty of care cuts into play. And the last one is bullying, which is the repeated unreasonable behaviour that is a risk to health and safety. And we can talk about that in a whole separate session. So that's the background broadly. And what I want to introduce is this construct of best practice, which is an integrated approach to mental health for your business. But what I mean by an integrated approach is quite simply represented on this slide. I mentioned the spectrum, which you can see on the left-hand side, and an integrated approach is one that touches on promotion of good mental health, protection by identifying and eliminating, if possible, those risk factors, or if you can't eliminate, putting in place protective factors, and providing support for those people who may be experiencing a mental health condition. And you can see how there's green, amber, red in that integrated strategy, which touches the green, amber, red in the mental health spectrum. In other words, it's an approach that applies to 100% of your business, not just those who may be experiencing a mental health condition. So that's a very important point, because the more you can keep people in the green, the less likely people are to head into the amber or the red. An alternative way of looking at this, and I apologise, the colours flip around, and it's because it's a different source, but you can see here that that red and amber applies to about 20% of your staff, and that's where the workers' compensation, absenteeism and turnover impacts on your business. The other 80% is where you have job satisfaction, productivity, high performance, innovation, and a proactive workplace. So that's the background I wanted to touch on before I go on to now talk about tools and resources for small business owners. And I'm particularly touching on owners here, but it also applies to staff. Because quite often in a small business, in our experience of talking to small businesses, that, well, they keep hearing about this is what you need to do for your staff. This is what you need to do for your employees. However, small business owners typically have a range of challenges that larger businesses don't have. You may have your house mortgaged against your business, so the risks and stresses for yourself are much higher. And in the work we've done at Beyond Blue, we have a particular focus on small businesses for what, when you think about it, is fairly obvious reasons, which are kind of represented in this slide. That we know 97% of businesses in Australia are sole operators and small businesses. There are 2.3 million of those businesses, and you can see the breakdown based on sole operator, micro business and small business. But almost half the Australian workforce is in a small business. In other words, about 4.7 million people. So if we, as Beyond Blue, want to make an impact on workplaces, we clearly need to approach and have resources particularly focused on small businesses. And you can see on the right-hand slide there a resource that I'm going to refer to in a lot of the remaining of my presentation, and one that you will be sent a copy of after at the end of today. And this is supporting small business owners to improve their mental health and well-being, and it's a guide for work contacts, family and friends. Now, I would suggest to you, and you'll see hopefully why as I progress, that this is also a resource for you as a small business owner to support your clients, because the principles are very much the same. So let's have a quick look at some of the elements behind why this is important. Mental health is an essential part of good business planning. A mental health strategy, or rather than a strategy, if you think of a big document, an understanding and approach to mental health is an integral part of any business plan. It's an element, an essential element of business continuity. If you're a sole business owner and you're unwell, your business stops. If you've got a small business of, say, 5 people, based on those statistics I showed you earlier, if one of those individuals experiences a mental health condition, 20% of your workforce is impacted. So just as you plan for a whole range of other things in your business planning and risk management, you must plan for what is your approach to mental health? What is your approach to providing a supportive culture in your workplace so people are open to discussion, there is no stigma, people do engage and support each other. It's an essential element of your people management, and it can be an essential element of your client relationship. I think Brett's introduction really touched on how your relationship with a client can have a really powerful impact on your business, but also the health of that client can have a very powerful negative impact if they become unwell, or the unfortunate instance that Brett mentioned where the individual took their own lives. So I'm very much coming from the approach that this is normal business planning. It is not an add-on. It's not an option. So let's have a look at the resource I mentioned. It does go into some of the things I've mentioned today, the mental health and well-being on small business. It touches on the construct of the spectrum and goes into that in a little bit more detail. It talks about providing some of the skills around speaking with someone you may be concerned about. So how do you have this conversation? Either with one of your staff members or with a client. And the resource gives you some introduction, and it's an interactive resource. It will point you to other resources that are available from Beyond Blue to help you with that conversation. This is a conversation very much not around making you a counsellor. That's not what it's about. It's a conversation just as you would in a physical sense, where you observe changes in an individual's behaviour, be they a staff member, a client, or even a family member. You reflect those changes in behaviour and say, how are you? How are you travelling? You might share your own experience, and you'll point to where that person can gain support, either within your business or to resources like Beyond Blue or Mental Health First Aid, as you'll hear from Kathy. So that's what that's about. I'm not going to go into that a lot today because there is a lot more information there in the links provided in this resource. The resource highlights some of these signs and actions at both personal signs for each stage of the spectrum, as you can see here. There's a list of personal signs, there's a list of signs of individuals at work, and here next to it are some of the actions you may take to address what you see, both as personal solutions or at work solutions for the varying stages of the spectrum. And going back to the question, I think it was Peter raised earlier, here are some of the effective actions you can take. And each of those hyperlinks in blue there link to further details about each of these resources. So here on a page is a great summary of changes of behaviour, personally, at work, and what actions you can take. So I very much encourage you to look at that, look at those actions, and take it from there. The next step of the resource looks at some solutions, but the middle page here identifies, and is downloadable, a personal wellbeing plan for yourself and a wellbeing plan for the business. And I'd just like to take you fairly quickly through this personal wellbeing plan to give you a sense of what it's like and how simple it is. So it's literally just a series of questions that, and here they are. It takes you through things like, well, why do I have a small business? What are some of the triggers that raise my stress levels within the business? Things like managing cash flow, obtaining support when you need it, completing paperwork and compliance documentation. List those triggers and identify what are your actions to look after yourself with respect to those triggers. It then goes on to look at what are your warning signs, and it gives you some examples there. List some of the ones that apply to you personally, and what are the actions you can take. What are some of the positive habits that can improve your situation? And there's a list there of some practical things like investing in the right equipment, talking to banks and ATOs and creditors, keeping in touch with families and friends. And again, you take those and adapt and identify the ones that are important for you. What can you do to make things better for others? What's your plan if you're unable to work? This is the business continuity part. How are you going to manage that? Here's some suggestions, and you identify your own. And finally, what's your return to work plan? How your family and friends can be supportive, and what professional support you can call on. So this takes you step by step through a lot of those things I mentioned earlier to help you identify your actions and put in place what I would describe as, if you like, an element of your business continuity plan. A lot of the resources that are referred to relate back to the Beyond Blue workplace mental health website, which is called Heads Up, and it's headsup.org.au. And it has across the top of the page there the key headings around healthy workplaces, your mental health, supporting others, and access to a whole raft of free training and resources. Each of those headings has a lot of depth and information, and I won't go into them today, but I'd encourage you to have a look. Healthy Workplaces touches on a lot of what we've talked about. Your mental health describes, well, how do I recognize where I am on the spectrum and what things can I do? Where can I go to get support? Supporting others. How do I have this conversation with my staff? How do I have this conversation with my client? What are the boundaries? How long do I have this for? I'll just give you a quick look at the training and resources page. These are all evidence-informed resources, and they're all free. So there's personal stories from individuals talking about what happened to them, what they did, and where they are now. And they're based on stories of hope, recovery, and resilience. As I mentioned, there's downloadable education and training programs. There's online programs, a whole raft of webinars. There's a webinar there from a small business advisor. He's actually an accountant talking about his personal experience, what he's done and how he applies it to his business. There's further reading, there's blogs, and if you really want to know more about it, there's a whole raft of information in terms of statistics and resources. Now, I just want to touch back on that element of identifying risk factors in your workplace. We sometimes hear that, well, it's easy to see physical hazards, but mental health hazards are hard to identify. Our experience is that we do actually see these hazards, but we don't recognize them as mental health hazards because we're just not used to it. And the next slide will give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. So here's some hazards across the top of the page from an individual, an organization, and an occupational perspective. Things we'll know about: overwork, poor work environment, physical hazards, working in isolation. We know those things, but we don't often identify them as hazards. And underneath that are some of the protective factors we can put in place: a flexible workplace, proper resourcing, having the right culture, risk management, social support. What is the individual environment and the organizational environment like? That's what I've been talking about around identifying the risk factors and putting protective factors in place. Each of your workplaces will be different, and if you really want to dig into it, Safe Work Australia has an excellent guidance material around this. and there's actually a link to that on my final slide. I just want to, in wrapping up, briefly talk on COVID-19 and mental health, because COVID-19 represents another one of those risk factors to our mental health and what we can do about that. COVID-19 is a universal risk factor. Everybody's being impacted by it. It's a time where there should be no stigma around acknowledging this is becoming very stressful for me or for my clients. What we at Beyond Blue have done with federal government funding is establish a specific coronavirus mental health support line. You can see the number, 1-800-512-348. It's available 24/7. It's staffed by mental health professionals. They have additional training around concerns and what's the latest information relating to COVID-19. And this is a number to call if you, or you can pass it on to your clients or your staff, have concerns about how you may be getting more anxious given what's happening around the pandemic. This is the number to call. It is also accompanied by a coronavirus mental wellbeing micro website, and the blue is the link to it, which will be live in the PDF file that you get. And you can see on the left-hand side there, that's the home page for that website. It does have particular sections on elements like working from home, which is clearly one of the big changes. And it also we've just updated it with some information for small businesses. I wanted to just highlight a recent report I saw from KPMG around some of the impacts of COVID-19 and how it does touch on your businesses and therefore touches on mental health. And it is that cash liquidity issue, business continuity plans having to be rethought, and clearly mental health is part of that, dealing with new levels of ambiguity about what you can and can't control, how you balance the health of your employees and the viability of the business in a way we haven't been challenged before. And this is a new environment we're going to be running with for who knows how long. So this is something that is going to be an ongoing impact on both your business and your clients. And just finally, some quick slides around how we relate this back to the integrated approach. And if you know someone who's been stood down, work loss, how can they stay well? The first thing is being kind to themselves. These are literally extraordinary times. Unless you're about 110, 120, nobody has experienced a pandemic before. The last one was 1918. So we're all in this unknown space. And if you look on the right there, there's some ideas mapped into that integrated approach of promote, protect, and support, and some examples of what we can do in those spaces. Working from home is the other challenge. We've got about 60% of the working population currently working from home, where they haven't before. And again, you can map some of the strategies for that into that protect, promote, and support approach. And this is going to be ongoing for all of us. And finally, you can think of, in very simple terms, protect, promote, support. Promote is filling up your bucket of mental health. Apply it to your physical health as well. This is where you build your energy and your resilience and resources. Protection is acting to stopping damage to your bucket that holds your fill of mental health, stopping the dints. What are the things that may dint the bucket? Putting things in place to protect them. Support is where the bucket sprung a leak. What are you going to do to fill the hole, to go back to filling up your bucket? And across the bottom there are some examples of some of the things we can all do at the current time. They're all I wanted to go through this morning. They're my contact details for you. You can see on the right are the links to both Heads Up, Beyond Blue, and the Coronavirus Mental Wellbeing Support Service microsite. I've included there another link to a document about a how-to guide for organisations. That Safe Work Australia link is the one about a systematic approach to meeting your duties with respect to work-related psychological health and safety if you really want to have a look at that. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions. And I'd now like to hand over to Kathy from Mental Health First Aid to go through her presentation with you this morning. Over to you, Kathy.
Great, thanks, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. This is a really great experience and privilege for me. So I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge people with the lived experience of mental illness and their contribution to the work of Mental Health First Aid Australia. So in the time that we have together today, I'm just going to run through a bit of the interplay between mental health problems and financial difficulties. I'm going to talk about what mental health first aid is. I'm going to throw a few quick and dirty tips at you for supporting your clients and your colleagues. And then I'm also going to share some of the resources that we have developed or have that you may find useful. So before we begin, I think I've done this a little bit backwards. That's all right. Let's start by talking about financial difficulties and mental health problems. I think one of my slides is missing, so I just would like to tell you what mental health first aid is. So mental health first aid is the help that you offer to someone who's experiencing a mental health problem or in a mental health crisis. So it's similar to physical first aid. The help is provided, or the support is provided until professional help is received or until the crisis resolves. And what Mental Health First Aid Australia do is we develop courses that teach people mental health first aid skills. So mental health first aid, probably about 2/3 of our courses are delivered in workplaces, and it is a really great tool to use as part of your mental health strategy. When we look at Michael, him talking about protect, promote, and support, we would fit kind of in that support area. So the relationship between mental health problems and financial difficulties is complex. Financial difficulties can certainly lead to mental health problems, and mental health problems can lead and worsen financial difficulties. So in a large UK study, they found that people in debt are 3 times more likely to report an anxiety or depressive disorder. And then in an Australian coroner's report looking at suicide deaths over a 5-year period, they found that financial difficulties were a factor in 9% of these deaths. And in a large, really robust Australian national study, found that people receiving welfare payments were more likely have to considered or attempted suicide. So a hardship is a situation where a person is unable to pay for necessities like electricity or food. And in the same large Australian national study, 7.5% of Australian participants who reported one and 13% who reported multiple hardships also reported depression, as compared to 3% reporting no hardship. So there are a number of ways that financial difficulties can impact on mental health. There's the obvious way that, significant stress and anxiety about financial problems, or if they're in debt, the debt recovery process can cause, significant mental health problems. But also a person with an existing mental illness may not be able to pay for medication or see their mental health professional, again, leading to a worsening of their condition, or they may experience isolation and lack of support because they don't have money to go out and socialize. Mental health problems can impact on financial difficulties as well. The person's mental health problems may affect their memory, concentration, and motivation to pay bills or sort financial tasks. They may make poor financial decisions because they don't feel well, and spend money when they shouldn't, or not actually pay their bills. And they may feel overwhelmed by financial tasks. There are also specific financial difficulties for people with mental health problems. So there may be debt incurred due to drug, alcohol, or gambling problems. They may have increased medical expenses. They may overspend when in a manic or depressed state. They may experience job instability associated with episodic mental illness, or like poor money management due to paranoid thoughts, for example, trying to keep their money safe by taking it out of the bank. So now we're going to switch to your mental health as accountants. So this is a study looking at the rate of mental illness in various industries, and you can see that financial industry experiences, 33% of the financial industry experiences any mental illness, and this is compared to about 20% of the general population. Beyond Blue did a study back in 2008 and found that accountants had higher than average depression scores as compared with the general population, and they came in at third highest for depression out of the professionals that they looked at. And, you know, it's good to be high achieving, but maybe not so much in this area. Beyond Blue did another study in 2011 and found that there were high levels of awareness and knowledge regarding depression and anxiety, which is great. Lower levels of stigmatizing attitudes, again, that's fantastic. But there was also low levels of confidence in managing mental health issues in the workplace. And this is where mental health first aid steps in to fill this gap, because we teach people how to manage mental health in the workplace on an individual level. And our courses have been shown to increase confidence in being able to address mental health problems in someone that you know. So now we're going to go to a poll. Katrina, I'm wondering if you could put that up. Right, so if you had a coworker or a client that you were concerned may be experiencing mental health problems, what did you do? Did you do some research on mental health problems? Talk to them about your concerns? You didn't do anything because you didn't think it was your place to say anything. You may have suggested that they talk to a professional, gave them information and resources. Maybe you did nothing because you didn't know what to do. Or perhaps you've not ever had concerns about a coworker or a client. So we'll just give a few more moments to complete this poll. And again, it's anonymous. We won't know who answered what, so please feel free. And now we're just going to wait a few seconds for the results to come up.
10 seconds for the results there, Kathy.
Great, thank you. Can be sometimes difficult not knowing. Okay, so there were a few people that did nothing, and that's completely normal and natural if you don't know what to do. Let's see, the majority of people suggested they talk to a professional, which is great. That's something that we teach in mental health first aid. And talk to them about your concerns. That's fantastic. That's you know, sometimes the best thing you can do is just sit down and say, hey, I'm concerned about you. So that's really great. So this is the slide that I thought came earlier. I'm sorry. So mental health first aid kind of steps in and teaches you how to have these conversations with people. So when should you be concerned? Michael certainly touched on this, but you know, if there's a major change in the person's normal way of thinking, feeling, or behaving, if these changes affect the person's ability to function at work, at home, or socially, and if the changes do not go away quickly or last longer than expected. So this assumes that you know the person, and sometimes, you may not have a lot of contact with the person, but certainly if it's someone you have an ongoing relationship with, either a colleague or a client, these are the sorts of things you need to be thinking about. Here are some of the general signs for people experiencing mental health problems. So difficulty with motivation and getting things done. They might be withdrawing, difficulty with concentrating or making decisions. Conflict can be an issue within teams, excessive worry or fear. And then sometimes they come out as physical signs. So it could be, gastrointestinal problems, headaches, sick and run down. There could be other things like weight loss and weight gain. So being on the lookout for those things, and if you've noticed any of these signs in a colleague, particularly if they're a change from their normal behavior, you might want to have a conversation with them. And then there's some additional signs to think about with your clients. So, if they're normally right on top of all their financial activities that they need to be doing, and lately they've not been paying bills, that might be something to think about, to be concerned about. They're making poor financial decisions, overspending, giving money away, or also missing appointments. So if you've got someone that always, turns up for appointments and on time, and they've started missing appointments or being late, that might be an indication that they're experiencing some mental health problems. So what should you do if you've noticed some of these signs? Well, first of all, you've noticed, so that's good. And to ask about, how the person's going, and then importantly, listen to what they have to say and point the person into information or professional help. Your role is not to diagnose, and certainly it's not to solve the person's problems. So it's really important that you listen and show empathy. That's one of the best things you can do with someone. So when you're talking to them, one of the things you can show that you're listening and are concerned about them is that you ask questions that demonstrate that you care and want to help, that you ask questions that clarify what they're saying. One of the best questions you can ask is, how can I help you, or what do you need from me? Listening is so important. A good rule of thumb is that you should not be talking more than they are, and paying attention to their body language and tone of voice, because so often when we ask, how are you, it's an automatic, yep, I'm fine. But as you talk to them, you can tell things are going on, and you can point to the things that you've noticed in their body language or their tone of voice. Giving the person extra time to think and express themselves, particularly if they're experiencing symptoms of depression, that can really slow down their thought processes. So allow some silence, and that's okay. It may feel awkward, but it's usually quite helpful for the person. And reassuring them that what they're feeling is okay can be really comforting and helpful to them as well. Assisting someone right now is a bit strange when we're not actually meeting with people face to face. But there are a few additional things that you can do. The first thing, if you know you're going to be having a conversation with them about mental health, is before the conversation starts, have a plan for what happens if the Zoom call drops or the mobile phone drops out, that you have a plan to call them on the landline or use some other form of communication. Particularly if you're on the phone with the person, your tone of voice is really important. They can't see that you are listening, so your tone of voice will indicate that you are really engaged with them. And you also may need to use some more cues, some ahas and mms, to let them know that you're listening. Right now, privacy might be more difficult because you or the person might be working at home with a partner, or there may be kids around. So it's important that you think about this, talk about this. You may need to, go for a walk with the person around the block and talk on the phone to allow a bit more privacy. And being more intentional with socializing with your coworkers right now is important. You can no longer have a chat over the water cooler or at lunchtime or just drop into their office. So what I've started doing is I am once a week picking a coworker of mine, and we'll have morning tea or afternoon tea together. So a 10, 15-minute chat. It may be about work. It may not be. A couple of weeks ago, I had learned a whole lot about Muggle Quidditch, and that was really enlightening for me and interesting. So I would encourage you to do the same. There are certainly some things that may not be helpful. Often, some of these things we say thinking that it's going to be helpful, that it might be comforting or help them pull out of the funk that they're in. But oftentimes these things aren't super helpful. So avoid saying or doing things that could be perceived as trivializing, like, oh, you seem all right to me, or you have so much to be thankful for. Saying, I've had the same experience as you, even if you have had the same experience, I would doubt that it's exactly the same. And, the person might think, well, if you know what I'm going through, why do I need to talk to you about it? Why do I need to say anything? Telling the person to stay busy, get out more, snap out of it, get your act together. Really important not to say things that might embarrass them, like, oh man, everybody around the office is noticing you're not doing so well, or minimizing the person's problems by comparing them to your own or those problems of other people. So we know that what to do if the person is experiencing suicidal thoughts. So they may directly say, I'm thinking I might be better off not to be here anymore, or they may not, but you may get a sense that they might be thinking of suicide. And what's really important in this situation is that you ask directly. I promise you can't put the idea of suicide in their head. So, asking, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? That's really, really important. It's also important that you take any threats or warnings seriously, particularly if the person is experiencing paranoid thoughts. These conversations cannot be kept confidential, and it's important that you let them know that, and that you seek assistance from someone else. So that could be a manager, or it could be a mental health crisis line, or the mental health crisis team. And then important to take any necessary protective action. So whether that be you may need to call the police at some point, or the mental health crisis team. And if you're having a conversation with someone on the phone, it's important that you find out where they are, get the address, so that if you do need to call the police, that you'll be able to direct them to where the person is. We know that 65% of people with a common mental illness do not receive professional help, but we also know that people are more likely to seek help if someone suggests it. So for all of those in the poll that said you directed someone or suggested that they seek professional help, that's great, because that means that person is more likely to go see somebody and get some help. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So all of those things that I just talked about, we talk in much greater detail in our courses. So I would highly encourage you to check out our courses, and if you think that you'd like to learn more about mental health first aid. We have a number of resources on our website. So we've got a whole mess of guidelines that we've developed using a research method called the Delphi method. The reference, or the web address is up there at the top. About 3/4 of the way down the page, you'll see some resources that we developed for helping people experiencing financial difficulties and mental health problems. They were originally developed for financial counselors and financial institution staff. And then I worked with chartered accountants to put together a resource for accountants. And although it says it's for chartered accountants, none of the information in there is specific to chartered accountants. It would all be relevant to you guys as well. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. And then below that, we have some guidelines for the workplace. So one is about providing mental health first aid to a colleague, or there's also sections on what if you're the person's manager, or what if the person you're concerned about is your manager. And then the University of Melbourne has developed a couple of sets of guidelines that are on our website as well. One is on assisting someone to return to work after being off because of a mental illness, and then also promoting a mentally healthy workplace. We've also developed some health and mental health resources around COVID-19, and you can access that through our homepage. Two resources that will be particularly helpful to you perhaps is assisting someone affected by the COVID-19 crisis and dealing with COVID-19 anxiety. Of course, our courses are available to you. So we've got 2 courses that aren't available right now, but the standard mental health first aid course, which is a 2-day course. And then we have a blended workplace course, which involves an online component and then a 4-hour face-to-face. In response to COVID-19, we've very rapidly developed a blended online course for the community and the workplace. This involves the e-learning component with our normal blended course, and then the face-to-face component is delivered in 2.5-hour video conferencing modules. We also are in the process, and I hope to have released in the next perhaps month, a course for financial services professionals. So that's aimed at you guys. So be on the lookout for that, and that will be delivered the blended online, so the e-learning and the face-to-face video conferencing modules. We also have a workplace engagement team, myself and my colleague Mary, who are here to help you embed mental health first aid into your mental health strategy. We also have a recognition program called the Skilled Workplace Program, and this basically recognizes workplaces who are doing really amazing things in their workplace. And that is it for me, so we can move on to some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you very much, Michael. We have about 20 minutes remaining, so that gives us time for questions. So Brent, Kathy and Michael, if you open your mics, and I pass it over to you, Brent.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you, Kathy and Michael, for those presentations. So much to take in. I'm sitting down writing notes everywhere, and I hope our listeners are doing the same. I've got a few questions coming through, so I will make sure I ask the questions that have been asked in the poll. But please, if you have any questions, I just remind you, if you can please ask a question in the Q&A section of your panel. So I'll ask a question first, and maybe I'll second that with Kathy and Michael. I'm aware of potentially you getting questions privately. You may have received some questions privately. So firstly, have you received any questions from the audience privately that you have or that you could answer?
Brett, I got one during the presentation, and I acknowledged it and kind of addressed it during my presentation, which was the one around what are effective mental health interventions, and the guide that I referred to lists a whole pile of those actions individuals can take both for themselves and for their workplace. So I think we covered that off in the presentation and in the document people will receive after the webinar.
Thank you, Michael. Kathy, did you
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Well, I'll ask some questions here. So one question I've got here, which is attending to burnout and what are the signs of burnout, and what strategies could we put in place to reduce burnout. And I'll just add to that to say from the perspective of the accountant themselves, and then maybe also from identifying it with our client or employee as well. Kathy, would you like to start with something like that?
Sure. It might be good to start with Michael, because I think that's more up their alley in terms of some of the resources that they have. We definitely look more at the mental health of others and don't cover burnout as such. So Michael might be good to start, and I may have some things to add.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Brent, and thank you for the question. Burnout's one of those characteristics that you'll find in a workplace that probably relates to the behaviour you can see, or you yourself may be overworking at particular times, and it's recognising that that is a risk factor to mental health, and therefore doing something about it at the time. I can give you an example personally right now, working from home. What I'm finding is it's very easy to spend a lot more time working and working longer and more intently. It's a strange situation in the fact that I would probably say I'm more productive doing what I'm doing right now than I am in the office. And I've noticed personally that, okay, at the end of the day, this is really tiring, and I'm trying to work out what the hell's going on. And it is the risk. So the sign is tiredness, understanding what's happening, what's the protective factor I can put in place around burnout. So a couple of things. One, talk to my manager, and if it's your own business, then that's a bit hard, but I've spoken to my manager and said, hey, look, getting a bit wind down by all this at the moment. I'm just going to focus on these things for now and pick up these later. And yep, totally, that was fine. The other element was to structure my day and deliberately put in place in my diary, right, now's the time for morning tea. And I get up from my desk and go out and do something different. And I'll also put in very clearly a time for a lunch break, and I'll get up, go away from my desk, and I'll typically go take the dog for a walk around the park. So it's managing your workload. One of the risk factors, if you remember, for poor mental health was overwork. Burnout often relating to overwork, which can in turn relate to poor work design, poor job design. Why are you getting more work? How can the work be reallocated? Those kind of things. So it's understanding that burnout is not a positive thing. The old construct of, work, burn the midnight oil is not what we are about. It does not create productive, high-performing workplaces. So that's a general response in my sense for around burnout. It is a risk factor, and it's important to identify it and put protective actions in place.
And I guess where I can add to that is that if you notice these symptoms in a colleague or a client, then making the time to sit down and have a chat with them about what you've noticed, letting them know that you're concerned about them. If you're their manager, it's it is really important that when you sit down to talk to them, that you let them know that you're here to talk to them, not from a performance point of view, but out of concern, and perhaps not to have these conversations in your office, but maybe, right now you can't have them anywhere in an office anyway, but outside of the current situation, that it not be had in your office, that you maybe go out for a coffee and have a chat, or go for a walk and talk about the concerns that you have and the things that you've noticed, and then pointing them in the direction of help. So whether that be EAP or talking to their GP, or perhaps, just chatting through it may be enough to kind of help the two of you put in place some of the things that Michael has talked about.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Michael. You mentioned EAP there, Kathy. Can you just explain specifically? I'm sure that many people haven't heard of it, just what that is.
Sure. Sorry. So it's the Employee Assistance Program, and it's a program that employers may subscribe to, and it allows your workplace or your employees to have access to a psychologist and perhaps other services, depending on who they've subscribed to and what's on offer. But having a chance to have a chat with a psychologist, and it's anonymous and it's free to employees. So I know our workplace, we have access, we as workers as well as our family have access to 6 free sessions of with a psychologist through the EAP. Yeah,
great. And thanks, Kathy. And I must say that we use that too. And what happens from an employer perspective, I pay an annual subscription. It's not a lot of money, really, compared to the impact that it has. Hundreds of dollars I'm talking, not thousands. And what happens is the team members are fully aware of that, and they or their family can use this program. And I do not know who uses it to start with. I would receive a consultation invoice, at the end of a month, and I would know then that maybe 1, 2, or 3 people may have seek some assistance throughout that period. So I may become aware through other avenues, through having discussions with my team, but that consultation is completely anonymous, and we've got tremendous feedback from that from our team. So just wanted to share that too. Okay, I just want to ask another question, which may be a follow-on question. What is the best way to reply to someone who has asked you to keep conversations confidential? However, you consider it necessary to share the information with others for their own safety. So I might go to you, Kathy, with that one.
Yeah, sure. So you will have to talk to them. The best way is to say to them, I'm sorry, I can't keep this confidential. I need to talk to somebody, and then you need to work out the best person to talk to. If you can engage with that person to find who they would like for you to talk to, that is often the best way. But at the end of the day, if they say, no, I'm sorry, I don't want you to talk to anybody, you still need to talk to someone if there's risk of harm. And so that may be around, if it's at work, going to, a manager. It may be, if it's someone outside of work, it may be about contacting the mental health crisis team, an ambulance. And they may be angry with you, and it may be really difficult, but at the end of the day, it's better to have them alive and angry with you than not with us anymore, no longer alive. So it's important that you not keep those conversations confidential. But I'll stress, you need to talk to them and tell them that you're going to do that. And if you can work with them to find the best person that they're most comfortable with, then that is ideal.
Great, thank you, Kathy. And maybe to bring Michael in, I'd imagine we're talking about the spectrum here. If we talk about Michael's spectrum, that I would imagine that was at the heightened end, the red end of the spectrum, where there is self-harm potentially at risk. What, Michael, do you think is bringing others into the known about somebody's well-being? Just maybe push them along the spectrum a little bit back into the middle. If they're showing signs of irritability, maybe some absenteeism, but it hasn't maybe spawned into that self-harm perspective, how do you keep it from workmates? Because I know as an employer, you want to maintain a workplace where people trust one another, and maybe people are starting to question what's going on with this person, and you want to make sure that people are aware that they are going through something without going through and interrogating them too much. Michael?
Yep, that's a great question, Brent, and it's the classic challenge of being a manager, being a professional manager, being running your own business, is how you hold all these things together. It's the true element of people management and leadership. There's 2 ways of looking at that. If you have already in your organisation a culture and established a visibility around mental health that is supportive, that your staff know about it, that stigma is low, that you and the staff know that you will support each other, then it's less likely you will have that situation occur. Because one of the things about disclosing what's happening is the stigma of what will other people think, what will my boss think, and that's very powerful when you're not in a good place. But in an organisation that's already set the culture, and when I mean the culture, it's just the way you do things in the business. I'll come back to that. It's not necessarily a big change to what you are doing. If the individual's behaviour is having an impact on the team, I would hope you have already had discussions prior to this individual when you first notice their change in behaviour, expressing the fact that you've noticed that, and that is there anything the organisation can do to support them? Is there anything they want to share with you? And that pointed them to help and support. However, if an individual either refuses to say, well, no, there's nothing wrong with me, it's none of your business, just leave me alone, I'm fine, or the other side says they may disclose to you but say, hey, no, I do not want you to tell anybody else what I've said to you. There's two challenges there, two separate challenges. The first one is the one at which point do you, as the manager, business owner, and there's no hard and fast point here, it varies on the organisation and the needs of the organisation. At some point, after a number of discussions or attempts to discuss this with the individual, you will get to the point where you may need to say, well, if there's nothing happening or there's nothing you want to share with me, I need to let you know that your performance is unsatisfactory and is impacting on the performance of your team. And this then opens up the doorways to the normal performance management approach. But I would really like to stress with you, before you do that, that you have adopted the approach of asking the way Kathy has described to you, the questions, the way to ask, how to listen. You've documented those things, because if you get to the point where an individual is unable to fulfill the inherent requirements of the role, or their disruption is so much in the team, to the member of the team, there is the possibility that you can terminate their contract of employment. However, if you then get taken to the Fair Work Ombudsman and you cannot demonstrate what a reasonable manager would be expected to do today, and that is all those things that Kathy has described, having those conversations, you've documented them, because that is public knowledge. That is what businesses are expected to do. If you can document all that, you've taken the reasonably practical approach, and you need to look after your business, and you'll be pretty safe in your final decision. If you haven't, then you're open to losing an appeal with the Fair Work Ombudsman. The flip side is where you do have an organisation where I have disclosed to you, but I don't want you to tell the rest of the organisation. But the organisation knows that this is a supportive business. And it can be simply a conversation that says to the other members of the team, Michael is having some difficulties personally at the moment, or there's some challenges that Michael is facing, and we have taken some action to support Michael. As a result of that, this is going to impact on your workloads. I'm going to ask you to pick up some extra things, and you may notice some different changes in the workplace. Without telling them what it is, you just reassure them that this is what we would do for any other team member. Because I may have cancer, I may be needing heart surgery. I may have diabetes, and I may not want the rest of the team to know about that. But you would make accommodations in their work, and it would impact on the team. So it's part of having already set that environment whereby your team is, oh, okay, yep, I get what's happening. I don't need to know what the exact thing is, but you're supporting Michael in the way of the culture of this organisation and in the way you would similarly support me. So that's what the culture is broadly like. And so many small businesses actually have a great advantage in this space because they're small. In that, if you're in a large organisation, you don't know half the people that are on your floor. You don't have the close connection to people. In a small business, you will typically know people by name, you know who they are, you know things about their personal life, their background that they've shared with you. It's typically a much more open environment for having the support and sharing versus in a large anonymous organisation. So that would be my broad response to that question, Brent, unless Kathy's got something to add.
No, that's great.
Thank you, Michael. Comprehensive. I took a few things out of that, which sort of ties in a few other things. One was about the trust in a team and how important that is. Now, that starts at the top with leadership, I think, and I know how important you think it is from the importance of the leadership is in any strategy towards a workplace. But I'll just preface that by saying as well, you said it was easier than you think to get started, to just start the conversation. Now, I can add to that and maybe throw it back to you about the importance of leadership, but is it fair to say that as conversation as a group, proactively, without any symptoms of anyone showing any signs, saying in a group together and saying, we are very interested in the health and well-being of each other, and we want to learn more about how we can improve that for everybody and have a workplace that does support that. Would a discussion just like that as a group at least start the conversation for members to maybe come forward if and when they need to, just by having an open discussion with the team to start off with? Michael?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of approaching the broad topic, because you're talking about well-being, you're talking about supporting each other, and most importantly, it's great leadership, but it's also employee engagement. This is one of these spaces where you don't do things to people, you do it with them. Your employees will often know what are their big challenges in the workplace. What are the things that may be causing them stress? And if you provide that safe environment for them to express them, they will also express ideas of how they may be protected from those stresses. So that's a really great idea. And if I give you a couple of very quick examples. One, I know a small business that happens to be in Queensland. Every Monday morning, the team gets together and says, okay, how's everyone traveling? Anything happen over the weekend? Has anyone got some things happening in their personal life at the moment that we can help you with? And look, I might put my hand up and say, oh, yeah, look, one of my kids broke their ankle playing soccer on the weekend. He's got to have surgery on Wednesday. I'm really worried about him. Okay, thanks for telling us. What can we do to take some of the workload off you? That is a mentally healthy culture whereby you're sharing, you're being open, and you're actually identifying a stress that person has and offering support in a very open way. Another example is, it also happens to be from Queensland, but it's a large organisation. It's an energy provider. It's a blokey company. They have implemented an organisational approach to mental health, and a lot of that was changing the culture, the attitude of the guys around talking about mental health. And that's got to the space whereby now, when they go out as a crew to work on high tension power lines, they get together and say, okay, before we go up there where there's lots of hazards, how's everybody? Is there anything on anybody's mind that might be such that they shouldn't be the one to go up there? And again, I could give you the same answer. Or, look, my mum's really unwell. I'm not sure how she's travelling. It's a bit on my mind. Right, great. Thanks for sharing. You're not the one to go up there today. Somebody else will go up. That's the culture. That's how leadership can make these conversations happen. They're part of everyday business. We start our meetings at Beyond Blue with, how's everyone travelling? What's happening? It's as simple as that, and then it leads into the business.
That's great, Michael. Kathy, I might lead you in for a final question. It is relevant. I think you can add to what Michael said, but this question will probably be my final one. Can you advise if mental health training and awareness are more related to the HR function within the organisation, but specifically if the bottom-up change and impact works for an organisation without a top-down strategy? So sort of asking how that leadership and the team sort of work together there. And that's what Michael was going to say.
Yeah, so I've certainly seen it come from both directions, from bottom up and top down. It's certainly much easier if you have top down, not top down, but if you have support from leadership, it makes it a whole lot easier. So it can be instigated either from, from employees or from HR or from CEOs. We've seen it happen in our workplaces in lots of different ways. But it's certainly easier. And I would say if you're not leadership and you'd like to see something like a mental health first aid program instigated and you get it started, it's important that you go to leadership and have conversations and try to get them on board. We're developing some resources on building a business case. And so certainly if you would like to talk to us about that, please do contact us and we can talk to you about how to help get management on board with your mental health strategies.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I reiterate that, but maybe the awareness of the leaders isn't well known because they're so busy, but the team can definitely rally and start to maybe put some perspectives forward, which might brighten the awareness of the leadership. But hey, things like this make aware of leaders. We're leaders here if we own businesses, that we can now take that back and start to think about how we can start to put a strategy in place for our team and our people around us. So great example, Kathy. Thank you. I think we've run out of time now, to be fair. I'm very conscious of time. I just wanted to say thank you to you both. Both put together great presentations and very relevant for our industry, not only just in the time of COVID, but pretty much 24/7 around the clock. And I think we've got a lot out of today. And Kathy, in particular, I know you've got some great courses where you could go to MHFA for the guys to be able to learn more about how you could bring a professional into your organisation. And Michael at Beyond Blue had almost every tool, every webinar, every little bit of help to be able to guide you on a pathway if you are looking to go down this mental health strategy. So thank you very much to you both. Thank you. I might throw back to you, Katrina.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brent, and thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Michael. This does formally conclude today's webinar. I have just now shared with you in the chat function a link to the CPA Australia Public Practice website, mental health section as well. And I will also share with you as I wrap up the webinar a copy of the small business resource document referenced by Michael. In the next 3 days, you will receive a copy of the presentation, which will also have a copy of the business resource document together with an evaluation form and recording. We really appreciate your feedback, as it is extremely valuable to CPA Australia to help us deliver better events for you. Thanks once again to the Brent presenters and to Brent, and we look forward to welcoming you to another CPA Australia webinar soon.